very briefly before we get into the actual kind of discussion question segment, turn it over to the speakers to give a kind of an overview of who they are, what their organizations are, where they're coming from, and the nature of their involvement in the hydrogen space in Canada in particular, which we'll be talking about today. So if we could maybe begin with Brent and then followed by Carla and Kevin, that would be fantastic.
Sure, thanks, Mark. My name is Brent Lakeman. I'm the director for what we call the Hydrogen Initiative with Edmonton Global. You may not know too much about Edmonton Global. First, people think I'm the part of the news channel, but that's not the case. Edmonton Global is a relatively new organization to pursue economic development, investment attraction activities for the Edmonton metropolitan region, and we represent 14 municipalities that comprise the Edmonton metropolitan region. And our organization is one of the partners in the Edmonton Region Hydrogen Hub and getting involved in a lot of exciting initiatives on hydrogen over the past several years. I'm very happy the group would invite me here today because I'm certainly not young. I've been around the space for probably over 30 years around clean tech, clean energy, government innovation responsibilities within that. So I'm not sure if that's necessarily professional, not necessarily from the industry side, but hopefully I've been around energy a little bit, so happy to bring some insights today on all the exciting things taking place around hydrogen. And maybe just briefly, this collection of folks today on this call is really indicative of all the interest we're seeing in hydrogen, certainly in the Edmonton region, but really across Canada. And just for example, we're putting on a big hydrogen conference in about a month's time. And the numbers are just through the roof as far as the level of interest. So we're expecting to see between 6,000 and 8,000 people coming to Edmonton for only the second hydrogen conference. So it's quite the amazing times right now. So maybe I'll get to speak about some of that stuff in a few moments. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. And if we go to Carla, that'd be great.
Hi there, I'm Carla Pilardi and I'm with TC Energy. I represent our Canadian hydrogen portfolio, and I've been so excited to be invited here today to talk to young professionals in energy because hydrogen is something that I would say a little over a year ago, Brent and I met, and it wasn't necessarily on the radar. And since then, we've had the inaugural Canadian Hydrogen Convention. There's been many, many projects that have been explored, and we've spent a lot of time discussing how we can enable that hydrogen economy. So I'm delighted to be here and really looking forward to the discussion.
That's great. And I'll jump right in. Thanks, Carla. So I'm Kevin Larmer, Senior Director of Innovation and Markets with the Canadian Gas Association. We are the voice of the natural gas delivery industry in Canada. So we represent the companies who bring the natural gas to the meter at the wall of your house. And myself, I've been involved with hydrogen now for maybe about 5 years through the association. I sit as the co-chair of the Natural Gas Working Group as part of the implementation of the Canadian Hydrogen Strategy. I also sit on numerous CSA committees, including their Hydrogen Advisory Panel, where we're helping the codes and standards development bodies see and understand what the future looks like and what codes and standards need to be addressed for future adoption of hydrogen. So excited to be here. Thanks, Mark, for having me be a part of this. Brent, congratulations on your conference too. As CJA, we actually run a conference that'll be the week before in Calgary, CJA Energy Nexus, where we'll be looking at all things, including hydrogen in the natural gas industry.
That's fantastic. Yeah, no, thanks all for those introductions. And so from my perspective, I'm pretty green to the hydrogen space. No, I guess pun intended there with the coloring. But so I'm pretty excited to learn kind of as this is the new thing coming on the radar. I think the interest, like you said, Brent, is really picking up, and a lot of people are maybe just kind of learning about it relative to some of the other traditional resources. So very timely. So with that, I think we can move into kind of the moderation question discussion phase, which is great. So I'm just going to dive right in and kick it off with the first question I've got for the broad panel. So no particular direction in terms of who this is targeted to. So feel free to kind of take it on whoever would like to jump in first. But what role do you see hydrogen playing in Canada's transition to a low carbon economy? And how can we best leverage this resource to achieve Canada's climate objectives?
I can jump in if you want. Certainly, I can't speak about all of Canada. I'm speaking from the Edmonton metropolitan region. which is a pretty significant footprint within the province of Alberta. But we focus on transformational opportunities, and we see hydrogen as just an excellent example of that transformation for the economy, for regions like Alberta, like Edmonton. But each region will have some specific opportunities around the hydrogen opportunity. But we like to use the numbers that the federal government has put out through the Canadian Hydrogen Strategy, where we see it as a $100 billion opportunity for Canada, combining both the export markets for hydrogen that we can be very, very much a part of, but really also the domestic hydrogen economy. And that really translates into, approximately 350,000 jobs by 2050, if we can achieve the goals that are set out in the Canadian Hydrogen Strategy. And those goals are really well aligned with the provincial hydrogen roadmap that we have in Alberta, what we're doing regionally here as well. So, we think for our part of the country in particular, hydrogen plays a really significant role. As we look into the net zero decarbonization goals, it really comes down, largely to two energy production approaches. Electrification of a significant portion of our economy, parts of the transportation sector, other sectors as well. But hydrogen can play a really significant role for Canada. The number is around 30%, probably even larger for jurisdictions like Alberta, where we already use a lot of hydrogen for our industrial activities. But now we want to grow that into other parts of our economy, things like heavy duty transportation, for example. So, that all really, comes out to be a very significant opportunity for Canada to really show leadership in hydrogen use for key parts of its economy, probably to a larger extent even than other nations. We hear a lot of Japan and Korea and other jurisdictions looking to flip towards hydrogen, carriers like ammonia as well. So it'll be very significant for some parts of the world. But again, Canada, because of our distances between cities, electrification doesn't work for absolutely everything. So where it doesn't, hydrogen can play a significant role.
Do you mind if I jump in and build on that, Brent? I think that one of the things that's most interesting about hydrogen is the way it can enable Canada is that it is so adaptable. So TC takes the position that we're technology agnostic and we'll look at each specific area. So for instance, the way Brent spoke to Edmonton, Alberta is abundant in natural gas as a feedstock. And that type of hydrogen production pathway is one that TC believes is the best path forward for Alberta. In other parts of the country, we would look at an electrolysis-based model and then partner with those local areas to really understand what that use case looks like. So there's different parts of this value chain that we get to look at, which is the specific geographic region and how best to produce hydrogen in the area. And then what the demand use case looks like as to how it would be deployed to enable Canada on that decarbonization journey. When we look at the decarbonization journey, I truly do feel that it is a lot of different puzzle pieces that we have to put together. Hydrogen is one tool in the box that we're all using to figure out how we can achieve those goals. And all of the different types of energy production and energy use fall into how we'll get there as a country. So for me, it's been a journey to look at each of these areas and figure out how we'll deliver on that customer demand and what we can do to find the best solution for the problem set. And I've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of people like Brent when we bring up Edmonton and see how best we can deliver for the specific region and partner with local, not just federal governments, but provincial governments and municipalities to find out what their specific deliverables are and where we can fit into that process.
Maybe, Carla, I'll build off of your puzzle building. The puzzle piece that the natural gas delivery industry can be is one of those off-takers, transporters, deliverers of hydrogen. So what we're looking at in our industry is at first blending hydrogen in with natural gas. So we've already had 2 pilot projects. Actually, one was the first in North America to begin blending very low levels of hydrogen in the natural gas stream. The second one has actually started in the Edmonton area, where a bit of a higher percentage is being blended in. And we're doing these as pilot projects to look at the how is it going to operate? What does it look like inside our system? End use appliances, and how does it work for homeowners? A tremendous amount of work has gone into these. If I look at the first one that launched, it was about a decade of work that took place before we actually launched a molecule into the system, looking at testing of the infrastructure, again, of the end use appliances. How does that change flame? How does that flame change when you start to burn hydrogen? Because it's a little bit different than the natural gas molecule. We see this as a way to lower our carbon intensity inside the natural gas pipelines. Along with things like renewable natural gas, we can really show that we can reduce GHGs across Canada. Brent, you touched on electrification. And I think that's something that is sometimes easy to say, that we can just electrify everything across Canada. But the fact of the matter is the natural gas industry right now supplies about 40% of our energy needs. So that's about double of what the electricity is able to provide. And what that really means, and what we're looking at, is the huge amounts of electricity generation that needs to be built out in Canada, almost 4 times according to the federal budget that was just released. And then there's cost to do that. And that's not to say that there aren't some things that we can electrify in Canada. I just think it needs to have that focus on, back to the puzzles, that there's numerous pieces in this puzzle and you have to put them all together. You need all tools, all solutions, and hydrogen blending in the natural gas networks is certainly one of those.
And so, Kevin, just to build on that, do you find that when you're out there talking to other professionals or counterparties, that there seems to be less of an understanding about how those puzzle pieces fit together and how all of the, I guess, what people might consider legacy energy options fit into the broader low carbon economy, and at the participation from everyone that's required to deliver these projects?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the energy system is very complex. Brent, to date myself, I've been in the utilities for about 30 years now, 20 of those years in the natural gas industry. And my understanding of the energy system, I'm probably 75% of the way there. But there's many people making decisions who just don't understand some of the nuances of our energy, how it moves around, what peak loads are, and what that means for generation. So we really look at the natural gas industry, our pipelines, our ability to store months worth of energy within line pack in our pipes themselves as being, playing a huge role in delivering that energy all the way out to 2050 in Canada. And as this work on hydrogen, a better understanding of hydrogen, is that awareness, I think, and education around hydrogen, I think, is really what's key, what I think many of us are trying to do at this point in time, because there's a lot of things that are misunderstood about it as well.
I'm going to dig in on that one. What do you think is the biggest misconception that you've seen? Because I'm just curious. I want to throw that to Brent too. Sorry, Mark, for jumping in there, but I like this thread
that was where this was going. That's perfect. That's perfect. Yeah.
Do you want to jump on that, Brent? Mine starts out with a Led Zeppelin album.
Well, well, you go ahead. I've got a few, but let's hear from you first.
My first exposure to hydrogen was from the cover of a Led Zeppelin album. Again, dating myself on vinyl. I think people have some misunderstandings of the safety aspects of hydrogen. Again, coming from the natural gas delivery industry, safety is the #1 priority. We have 100 years experience delivering energy molecules to people's doors and doing that safely. Hydrogen is just a different molecule that we know through testing that we can blend in, as well as move 100% hydrogen. I think we have, Brent, over 100 kilometers of pure hydrogen lines in Canada already. We've been doing that for decades and decades as well. So we have the knowledge, we have the experience. It's building that out across Canada for areas that maybe haven't seen that before. So I think, helping policymakers understand. I think the engineering world, the academia world as well, is beginning to understand and see these things, a bit more from our perspective, in that we've been studying this for years. Piles of work's happened internationally as well on this. We were actually working with a consultant out of the Netherlands in a joint industry project who has done, tremendous amounts of work over there. And the other piece I'll always throw in is, in the hydrogen blending, this has been happening since 1976 in Hawaii, in the Hawaii gas system, and it's been operating safely up to about 15% at times. So this isn't necessarily something new for our industry. I think it's just new in North America, new in Canada to look at.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of hit it right on the mark, what I was going to cover as well. Definitely that experience that we've had here for quite a long time. in using hydrogen, certainly within the Edmonton region and our industrial economies that we've had. So, you know, a huge amount of expertise. And I'll keep kind of moving further into other parts of, you know, the future of hydrogen production from, you know, again, Carla mentioned natural gas in our jurisdiction is really important. Very low cost opportunities here. And when you couple that with carbon capture and storage, you know, you can get to an extremely low level of carbon intensity of hydrogen production that really does meet the standards of the day. But I think the misperception is often people go back and say, well, I've heard about this project from 10 years ago and, you know, it's got some challenges. And it's like, yeah, we know some of the earlier projects. We learned from those initial pilot projects. We're getting better. There's continuous improvement in the system. So, you know, we had some of the first large-scale CCS projects in the world 8 years ago. They've been injecting 1 million tons of CO2 deep into deep geological formations. I go to other parts of the world and people are still, you know, treating it like a science project. And it's like, you know, no, we've been doing this. We know how to do it. We've got an extremely good track record around this, building up a strong degree of expertise amongst a large number of companies, certainly in Alberta. And then we look at some of the latest projects. How are we building off of that? We're getting down to net zero hydrogen production. Companies like Air Products, they're Carla, talking about other companies, but you know, they're one of the largest hydrogen producers in the world. And you know, they've chosen Edmonton as a location for a net zero hydrogen facility. So they're pushing the envelope again. They're using new technology to capture the CO2 from that facility, going from, you know, maybe in the past we would have been capturing, you know, 70 or 80%. They're going up to the, you know, mid 90s. And then they're also making internal use of hydrogen to that facility to get to a net zero equation, which again meets the international standards. So we often hear about, you know, green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, and most of us keep saying it's about the carbon intensity, and we can show, you know, we're continuously driving down carbon intensity in hydrogen production. So we're going to need all types of hydrogen, whether it's from renewables, whether it's from natural gas coupled with CCS. New technologies coming to the fore. So I think the misperception is, you know, we treat it like something from 30 years ago and don't recognize the leadership and the technology, the innovation that's been happening over the last 10 years. And, you know, so much of that is actually happening in our own backyard. So I'm so excited to be part of that. So I think that would be probably the other main misperception that I pick up in different markets, especially in Europe as well, where you know, they're kind of solely focused on one type of hydrogen production and not recognizing we've got to scale this. We got to go big, and going big means let's start from, you know, what we can do today at a very significant industrial scale that might be 25 times the size of some of the other projects that are getting some attention.
That's fantastic. I just kind of building off that, it was coming up a bit in the discussion. So in terms of, you know, some of the blending that's really kind of the forefront now, or how that's making its way into home use. I'm just a bit curious about, you know, we talk about hydrogen, but what is the suite of its applicability, and how does that interact with kind of the existing components of the energy systems in Canada, and which components of that is it kind of, you know, more near term going to be playing a role in, and kind of what does that look like in maybe the midterm? So yeah, how do you kind of see that interaction in the short term, and how does this space evolve in the next 5 to 10 years, or what could that look like?
You want to go, Carla, on this one? You're looking at a lot of applications with TC.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to kick things off. I would say the breadth of applications is so widespread and dependent on geographic locations and what types of technologies are being deployed in the area. But I'll veer off of the natural gas pipelines and leave that one for Kevin, because I know that he can speak to it in much more detail than I can. But I've had the opportunity to talk to use cases with regards to industrial customers and how they would use hydrogen as a decarbonization pathway. Long-haul trucking is something that I find most fascinating because it can be deployed in any area where you can get a production solution. And the transportation emissions in Canada are one of the areas that the federal government and many provincial governments have called out as an area for improvement. That's how I'll categorize it. And so being able to underpin a production pathway for hydrogen trucking is something that TC has been spending some time on and partnering with a lot of the leaders in that space. Additionally, I think it's been really interesting to look at all of the new technologies as they get deployed, for instance, hydrogen forklifts, or how shipping companies can be using hydrogen on a day-to-day basis. I mean, I'd hesitate to try and name all of them, but one of the things that I would say is once you start looking into the use case for the molecule, the solutions are infinite, and it's just a question of what the what type of hydrogen is necessary, the CI score that gets you to what the customer is looking for. So as Brent mentioned, people often throw out colors, but once you start looking at the multinationals and those larger sustainability goals, it's the carbon intensity of the molecule that tends to be the driving factor behind the demand. And for everyone on the call, if you're interested in how hydrogen can fit into your day-to-day, I would say figure out where there's fuel switching opportunities or what types of energy you're using in your day-to-day. And hydrogen tends to pop up in areas that you wouldn't even expect. With that, I think Kevin can probably build on the natural gas pipelines opportunities and some of the other energy systems that would fall within his portfolio in greater detail, because I know that there's been a lot of different pilots and I don't want to steal that thunder.
Thanks, Carla. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about what I see as a timeline for hydrogen in the natural gas industry. So currently we're looking at pilot projects, low percentages. The highest percent right now is about a 5% blend. The other one here in Ontario is a 2% blend. I think over the next 5 years, what we'll see are further pilot projects built out in different provinces by the different utilities. I'll say that every single one of my utilities from coast to coast are looking at hydrogen and hydrogen projects. These projects take time. There are some pretty in-depth engineering assessments that need to be done, looking at the infrastructure, so the yellow pipes buried out in the ground to all of your homes. And in Canada, we do have a fairly significant portion of our pipelines in the deliveries distribution side are PE, so plastic pipes. Now, it's a bit of a different thing when we're talking about high pressure transmission lines in steel. That's where we get into some other issues like hydrogen embrittlement. But in the lower pressure PE pipelines, hydrogen embrittlement does not have the same issues. So we know that the vast majority of our delivery system can handle up to a 20% blend of hydrogen. And that may not sound like a lot, but when you look at the amount of natural gas that we move through Canada each year, that really equates to a fairly large reduction in GHGs. So I think that that's a really good target for us to move towards. And in fact, as part of the hydrogen strategy in Canada, industry has produced a report now putting that goal out for 20% hydrogen blends. Beyond that, in the next 5 years, we'll also see the first pilot project for a 100% hydrogen community. It's actually also happening in Alberta and was just recently announced with some funding from Emissions Reduction Alberta. So that's exciting because that'll be the first in North America as well, where we're looking at building out a purpose-built 100% hydrogen community. And that really is that first step into using hydrogen for home heating or cooking or whatever appliance that you're using in your house. When we're looking at that, that gets into a whole different set of challenges, and that really comes around codes and standards and the need and the development for codes and standards. So that's why we're working very closely with CSA and other organizations like UL as well to look at what changes need to be made in the vast suite of codes and standards that look at behind the meter type of appliances, piping, and things like that. So there's still a lot of work to do on that, but it's exciting. It's exciting times to watch this happen. I keep telling everyone who will listen to me in my peer group that this is a really exciting time, I think, to be in the energy industry.
And maybe get to pick up a couple other applications that we're seeing in my region as well. So definitely, we talk a lot about the planes, trains, and automobiles of hydrogen. So Carla's already talked a bit about the trucking sector, and hydrogen making a lot of sense for those long haul Class 8 heavy duty trucks. And our Alberta Motor Transport Association has been spending a lot of time on this. Then we see some other applications with municipalities, and certainly buses is the one in Edmonton that's moving ahead as well, with the city of Edmonton and the county of Strathcona demonstrating hydrogen fuel cell buses. So we sort of put a bit of a rope around this, and that's one thing we've been doing through our Edmonton Region Hydrogen Hub is trying to talk not necessarily about these individual pilot projects, but collectively, we think it's going to be 5,000 vehicles within this region that are going to be making a switch over the next 5 years. But that's not going to happen on its own. It's going to require a lot of work, everyone really coming together around sharing learning, sharing infrastructure, looking at new business models is the other one that's really key here, because we're seeing, really shifts in how these energy systems are moving forward. TC Energy, very much part of that, of course, with the partnerships that they've got around the mobility sector. So That's exciting. And then you go all the way into things like aviation. You wouldn't think the Edmonton International Airport, why would they be doing a lot of work on hydrogen? But they're probably a world leader in hydrogen use within an aviation environment. So we're so excited by some of the projects taking place around our own airport to make use of hydrogen vehicles, service vehicles, all the way into the actual aircraft themselves that are going to be testing hydrogen. So, we have partnerships in our region with world leaders like Zero Avia, testing some of the refueling infrastructure for hydrogen aircraft right in Edmonton. So who would have thought about these things? So, again, so many new areas that maybe weren't even on the radar a few years ago. And now there can be an opportunity for Canadian leadership from our region around all of these. And what does that mean ultimately for the new jobs that you're all part of and all interested in, and having a better understanding of what those could look like? And maybe I'll come back to that a bit later.
No, that's great. And so it leads into the next question I had, but as I hear some of those responses, this may not be as simple a question as I had maybe envisioned initially. But I was curious about learning more your perspectives about just painting the picture of hydrogen in terms of where its cost is right now, how it competes with other energy sources, and what that looks like in terms of, is it still something that needs a lot of support? Is it really dependent on the application about whether it is or isn't competitive? And that's kind of where the sense I'm getting is from the conversation. But if you can help kind of paint it in that spectrum of other potential resources, that would be really, I would appreciate that. So that'd be great. Maybe a Carla question.
You want me to jump in there?
Yeah, that'd be great.
I think that it really does depend on the use case. So as we talk about all the various applications, whatever the existing solution is, that's the number to beat. And depending on the use case, there's different layers of tax implications and incentives that will fall into whether or not hydrogen is an application, or whether or not this is a use case where hydrogen is applicable from an economic perspective and also a carbon perspective. So a lot of us are embarking on a low carbon journey as organizations and have set certain targets that we'll be seeing over the near and longer term. As the carbon tax escalates over time, there's that line of where lower in carbon intensity projects tend to be more economic. And then also the cost competitiveness of what the customer wants. So going back to that use case, there are certain instances where the demand is for a low carbon product, and that in itself is what's creating the market competitiveness and allowing this technology to flourish. There's other areas where, if I go back to trucking as an example, cost parity with diesel is the number to beat. I think that's one that most people understand quite easily, because they understand when they go fill up their car, if you've got two different pricing options, you usually want the one that is going to be the least intense on your wallet. Corporations feel the same way. And that's where, when you talk about help, I don't think that hydrogen needs help. I think that there's layers of policy that are impacting what types of pathways are going to be successful over a longer term, how quickly certain jurisdictions are making the change. Because in Canada, you've got federal policy and provincial policy, and you can stack those on top of each other to see where things are going. And then speed to market. So if you're a use case for hydrogen and you want to get your product out there in the market, you want to know who can give you supply most quickly so that you can fill that customer need. And depending on which jurisdiction has a regulatory approval process and an underlying natural resource that can be used as a feedstock to create hydrogen, you might make your selection process based on that as well. I think that there's, on Brent's side of the equation, he deals with a lot of the interesting end users that would fall within the Edmonton area, and has probably seen the specific calculations that are done along the way and could speak to those end uses. On the production side, we tend to look at whether or not we can get the facility where we need it to be, and then look at those use cases for the customers, because we're not going to build unless the demand is there. And I don't want to speak for Brent, but I think that Edmonton Global has done a really phenomenal job of aggregating that demand in the region and telling the story of what the hydrogen journey will look like for the city. So can I throw it over to you, Brent, to talk about how you do that? Because I think that that's so interesting, and it's been done in a really wonderful way.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, and thanks for the very positive comments. I'm not sure it's all what I've been doing, but through our partnerships with the Edmonton Region Hydrogen Hub. So what the hub has really been doing, and there's other hubs, beginning to pop up. We have hubs around the world, to be honest, but I think we're doing it quite uniquely in the Edmonton region by really understanding what is that demand, what can it look like. So we've got a vision for the hydrogen economy in 2032. So what is the number of vehicles that, we'd like to see switching over, where we think it's going to be very competitive to be using hydrogen, either in a fuel cell truck, and those are still, being developed and on their way, but also dual fuel trucks, because that's kind of a transitional technology that can allow us to move much more quickly and get this infrastructure in place. That's going to bring down the longer term costs as well. So what does that look like in transportation? What does that look like in heating and power opportunities? So we've got these estimates out within our hydrogen hub. So now we can start to engage the international market. This is my job. I'm about investment attraction. So I'm trying to actually, bring investors into this region, so they don't just think of this as the great location for a few pilot projects, but now this is a location for, hundreds, thousands of vehicles. So if they want to get those on the road, we have to be working closely with those and show how we can aggregate that demand. And that's, I think, the next step of our conversation is how do we, kind of create this larger consortia, the larger, blocks of demand. I'm focused on transportation right now, but we can see the same thing in heat and power and other applications. What kind of infrastructure do you need to start connecting supply and demand? Because yeah, we can produce lots of hydrogen at a really low cost globally, but the challenge then becomes, getting it into the hands of the consumer, and that won't necessarily happen on its own. So how do we, pursue some more systematic approaches to getting that infrastructure in place so everybody can benefit from it, and we can remain competitive and actually improve our competitiveness compared to our trading partners. So I've been traveling a lot, and saw a lot about consortia approaches when I go to Europe, the Netherlands, Germany, and other locations. So we're trying to also see what's been working elsewhere, what hasn't been working, and maybe we can again pursue some new models here. So even back to business models, we're really thinking this is the time to investigate some different approaches that will help catalyze, accelerate this transition.
Maybe I'll pick up on that too, Brent. So you being the natural gas delivery industry, we really will be the buyers of hydrogen. So all the work that's going into lowering the cost is in our customers' best benefit. But we have a challenge that's a little unique in that the natural gas utilities have economic regulators. So in Ontario, we have the Ontario Energy Board, and they're the ones who set rates for customers. So part of what we're looking at is outside of some of the provinces. So in British Columbia, their regulator lets them bring RNG and put that cost out onto rate base. And this is due to provincial policies that are mandating that they bring certain levels of renewable gases into their system. So to meet those policies, they have to be able to bring on renewable natural gas. Across Canada, we don't all have that same opportunity from the regulators. So right now, CGA is working very closely with the energy regulators, looking at what we're calling regulatory modernization, to recognize that there are these lower carbon gases that we can bring on, that the costs are going to be different than the low cost natural gas. And one of our big challenges is natural gas is really cheap. So anything that we're bringing on is bringing that cost of natural gas up higher. If I'm looking at renewable natural gas, the cost can be 2 to 3 times as much as what conventional natural gas is. But with that said, talking in kilowatt hours, natural gas right now is about 4 cents a kilowatt hour. Renewable natural gas is about 8 or 9 cents a kilowatt hour. So it's still extremely competitive with other sources of energy. So it's that regulatory challenge that we're working our way through right now. And I think that we'll see over the next few years, particularly as this hydrogen discussion, the hydrogen story grows and grows and grows. We're seeing more and more who are looking towards hydrogen. We're seeing more provincial hydrogen strategies being put in place. And we know that that'll unlock some of the change for that regulatory piece.
Maybe just building off that, Kevin, that's actually a really good segue to a question I had a few ahead, but I'll bump it up now because I think it fits nicely. So I'm just curious, when we think about coordination across segments of the industry, so between industry, between government, between academia, to accelerate the adoption and development of hydrogen in Canada, what are your thoughts on I guess maybe what's working well right now, where there's gaps, or how that interaction should be playing out as you move forward?
Yeah, maybe I'll start at the hydrogen strategy for Canada. So right now in the implementation phase, there are 16 or 17 working groups looking at all different areas of hydrogen. So whether that's marine, rail, transportation, production, emissions, codes and standards, and of course, natural gas. So I'll say there's a tremendous amount of coordination happening there with the federal government. Provincial governments are involved with these, as are all stakeholders. Within our industry, we have a joint industry project taking place where we have all of the utilities in Canada at the table. We're bringing in people like the CSA, provincial regulators, appliance manufacturers. We're working with a consultant who has done this internationally already, as I said before, in the Netherlands. And what we're really trying to do is grow that. We talk about hydrogen hubs. Well, this is like that information hub. This is that one place where everyone can come to the table. We can learn from what others have done. We can pool things together to help it, the economics of the research, bring that down, because we're sharing some of that costs around, and it's ensuring that everyone has access to all of that information. So we're seeing through that joint industry project, it's really bringing the timelines of when and how we can introduce hydrogen into our systems. It's moving that timeline ahead much, much quicker had we all tried to do this on our own. So collaboration is key on all of this.
I was just
Can I
maybe. In town here trying to, access capital and secure investment. So I think, it does require that really high degree of coordination and collaboration to show, at a significant scale what we're trying to do here. So that's been part of our approach as well. But, recognizing the US has had a very strong record of incentives out there, through the Inflation Reduction Act. We had the budget on Tuesday, and I'm still deciphering some of the information coming out of it. So it looks like there's definitely some intent to remain competitive. But I think we do need to recognize that we're not the only game in town here, and there's other parts of the world that are all trying to move quickly. And at some point, there's scarcity in the technologies, the capital. I think we know what we need to do, but it's going to require all hands on deck to get there.
I would echo that sentiment and say that I think that the collaboration that Kevin touched on is very similar to what we discussed earlier about the industry having all these different puzzle pieces as to whether or not the hydrogen economy is being enabled. On the government side and the community side, I believe it's exactly the same, because it's not a question of if, from my perspective, it's a question of when. And given the scarcity of technology, competition for capital deployment, it's all going to come down to what makes sense from an economic perspective first. And then those are the areas that'll get checked off. And then the when is when Canada or provinces, because we are competing between provinces as well from a government collaboration and incentives perspective, all of them will make sense. And so I think that Canada will get there. And I do believe that we're competitive, but we need to have the level of collaboration and the understanding that all of these puzzle pieces do need to connect for this to work. And being able to bring all of those people into a room and have the discussion about what's necessary to create the conditions for that to be successful is one of the best things that I think we can do right now.
I'm just going to jump in with one more point, because it really hasn't been stressed yet, and I probably made a mistake in not even acknowledging, I'm from Treaty 6 territory here in the Edmonton region, and when we talk about these opportunities, I think one thing we need to be cognizant of is, finding ways for our Indigenous First Nation communities to be part of this process as well, part of this decision making. That's been one of the things we've been recognizing through the Edmonton Hydrogen Hub, is we've got chiefs from 2 of our First Nations within the Edmonton region, that participate on that leadership team. So I think there's an intention. We want to make sure, they're part of this conversation, this decision around securing the economic benefits, so they also benefit. So I just want to really highlight that we may have missed a bit of that conversation, but I think that's really important as we move forward. And one of maybe the distinctions between how we've tried to address some energy developments in the past and how we want to do it better in the future.
No, great point. Thanks for that, Brent. So I'm looking at the time we have left. So I want to just get one quick last question in that's more targeted kind of towards the YEPN entity membership itself. And then after that, move to an open Q&A. So just as the final question, was curious what you see as sort of, if someone isn't really in the space right now, or you're thinking about people that are sort of in the early mid stages of their energy careers, what are the opportunities you see for them being involved more in the hydrogen space? Like what does that look like? Or where would you point people to into thinking about that world?
I think it goes back to everything being connected. And so if I can speak to my own career journey, I started out at an exploration and production company, moved over to the midstream space and was in gas pipelines and liquid pipelines, and then had the opportunity to explore renewables. And relatively recently, it's only been a couple of years that I've been in the hydrogen space. And I think that everything that we do along the course of our careers helps us build our repertoire of what we understand and how we look at the world. And the energy sphere is so interconnected, from gas to oil to electricity, wind, solar. No matter what you're looking at, the facets all are connected. And so if anyone is particularly passionate about hydrogen, wherever you sit within the energy space, there's an interconnect. And so figuring out what that is, exploring it and talking to the right people so that you can build on the experience you already have and market yourself would be my advice. And in the energy space, I feel there's so much opportunity. Had anyone told me 10 years ago that I was going to be playing in the hydrogen space, I would have never thought that that is where large scale midstream organizations would be focusing their time or their resources. But here we are today, and it is a huge deliverable and a big push, and it's on everyone's radar. And so taking every opportunity, seeing it as a way to enhance your knowledge of the energy industry, the technology, or anything, and then connecting with the right people to figure out how it can be applied on a go-forward basis is what I would recommend. And also just, you never know where your career is going to take you. So enjoy it and figure out, I try and do fun things. I want to have fun, deliver fun projects, and work with great people. And if you focus on those three, it'll take you in the right direction.
I love Carla's answer, and maybe I just jump in because I have a bit of an analogy myself. Again, I've been working for over 30 years now, so I'm not on the young side. But my first files were really climate change in the very early days, and I kind of thought, what's this climate change stuff? And I think didn't necessarily see it as this opportunity that now you look at what industries and the amount of people that are involved on the climate file. In all aspects of society, it's just incredible, and I certainly wouldn't have predicted it. But I probably didn't really think about that career opportunity at the time. I was just feeling, oh, it's another federal provincial issue I get to work on in government, and it's now I'm very much involved in hydrogen. So it does take you in very interesting places. But I think hydrogen in my mind is going to be a little different than just the climate change issue, which is kind of was initially focused more on government regulations and all that. But you see this economic opportunity that's out there, and you see again new business models being created. So it really hits at so many different marks within the economy. But what we're trying to do, I just want to also make it a bit real, is we want to better quantify what does this opportunity look like. So we're doing a labor market assessment in Alberta to really try to get a better sense, quantifiable. That here's what we think the jobs look like. We have some anecdotal information. We have the Canadian hydrogen strategy that talks about 350,000 jobs, but we all want to know where are these jobs and in what what specific realm. We know transportation is going to require some new skill sets as well. So I think we're going to have more information on that. But again, preliminary modeling based on other hydrogen ecosystems shows we're actually going to be growing the workforce, not reducing it when you factor in the future hydrogen economy. So we find it really exciting, but I totally understand we want to be a little more precise in showing and guiding where those opportunities are. But again, if I treat it like where climate change was 30 years ago, it's just going to be the tip of the iceberg here, and it's really going to grow.
And maybe I'll just really quick, I said it already, that this is a very exciting time to be in the energy industry. There changes are happening and it's moving fast. And I love every day that I get to come into work. And maybe the only thing I would add is my last interaction outside of my office, outside of the energy industry, talking about hydrogen was at my car dealership. I won't say who they are, but they are this brand is looking at bringing hydrogen vehicles onto market. And I started having a conversation with the manager and a couple of the salesmen. And I was telling them what is happening in our industry, and they were talking about their industry, and they had a lot of interest. But I think this goes all the way back to one of the first conversations we had about education and awareness. And these were people who never thought about hydrogen before, hadn't thought about what it could mean to have a hydrogen vehicle. And I hope I gave them some better understanding. And we look forward to watching more hydrogen use in different sectors. So the automobile industry is one of them.
Fantastic, thank you. And yeah, it's as the space grows and develops, I'm sure there'll be some new opportunities that come out that maybe you can't see 10 years down the road as the system changes with the pace that it seems to be. So no, that's fantastic. So okay, shifting into our final kind of portion, we've got about 12 minutes left in the time today. So want to go into an open Q&A with some audience members. So the way that hopefully we're going to try and do that. If you have a question, you want to ask it kind of verbally, please kind of use the raise hand function, pop on, and I'll try to call in as best of order that I think I can as that comes up. Or instead, if you'd like, put a question in the chat, and I'll kind of try to go back and forth between the two and get through as many as we can until with the time we have left. So I'll start it off with questions that have come in the chat just to kick it off, and then please feel free to add more or raise your hand as we're going through that. So the first sort of two questions are, I'll combine them a little bit, and they talk about, and Brent, you touched on this a little bit actually, about what the points of interest or opportunities are in terms of exchanging ideas with European companies, researchers, and then maybe more broadly, what does international collaboration look like in this space? So I know we're kind of focused on the Canadian context, but if you can kind of elaborate on that piece, and then please feel free to add questions as we're going through.
Oh, that's a good question. And I've been doing a lot of international connections. And I think that is, what can we collaborate most effectively on? So I've used already the example of some of the consortia building approaches we're seeing in Europe. I think other jurisdictions are also spending time on that. So how do you pull together initiatives that bring multiple parties together, the producer of hydrogen, the user of hydrogen, the vehicle manufacturers, to really focus on that broader value chain around hydrogen. So I guess that's one. I think the other one is, as we look at the export opportunity, really trying to ensure there's an understanding of what we bring to the table. And I know companies are spending an awful lot of time on this. So, I'm not saying there's necessarily a gap, but I think, again, it's what's that overall messaging, how we can support the needs of other jurisdictions. Yes, in providing the fuel, but I also like to think there's so many other things we can be doing to work with other jurisdictions. Europe's got a hydrogen backbone pipeline initiative that's worth 40,000 kilometers of pipeline. And, I think we have so much expertise in this province, and probably across Canada around, pipelines. And as we understand, metallurgical issues, different mitigation technologies, managing risk, we should be able to provide a lot of, similar approaches. And I know we've recently had a visit with some of our companies going off to Europe, to the UK in particular. So those are types of initiatives that are great. I think we need to do more work, though, to make sure we can connect, those other parts of our value chain. We have Canadian companies doing work in Europe on vehicles, and they're not spending time here working on our market. So we're trying to create a bit more awareness that, again, this is where you're going to see significant numbers of vehicles. So you should be focused as much here as you are in other parts of the world. So it's creating more of that awareness about those opportunities that go well beyond just the export itself of the commodity.
I'd actually build on that and say not just from a relationship perspective, but we also have the energy markets are international. So from a trading perspective, a marketing perspective, supply chain, the technologies that you're buying, using, and deploying, and then the end use case. So be it a fuel cell, a car, all of these things fit together. And I think that the conversations are happening. They're just not necessarily happening in the public sphere so that everyone's aware of them. But the success of enabling the hydrogen economy is a global puzzle that's being solved. And there's a lot of different pieces that are, I keep using the puzzle piece analogy, but they're all being put together. And I do believe that international collaboration is going to be one of the critical success factors moving forward.
And I think too, Carla, it's we're not reinventing the wheel on some of this stuff. Some of these things have been done in many other places. So it's that international collaboration to see what challenges, what barriers were faced, how we got past those, what developments have already been made, thinking codes and standards, what's already in place, how can we apply that here in Canada or North America? So I think it is an international collaboration on much of this.
Great. We've had one more question come in the chat here from Andre Dormiel. What will global hydrogen value chains look like? i.e., will it be hydrogen for derivatives, as commodity, as technologies? Any commentary around that?
Look at Carla.
I would say it's all of the above because there are so many different ways that you can monetize that molecule. And when we talk about businesses, if you're looking at a fuel cell vehicle, they would consider themselves part of the hydrogen economy. I know that the production side of the equation would consider themselves part of the hydrogen economy. And Kevin would say the transportation side, moving the molecule, is absolutely part of that economy. And as there's more supply, that trading desk will be built up as well. That hasn't happened yet today, but longer term, when we look at how power is traded, gas is traded, oil is traded, and what those international markets look like, I believe that that's where we'll end up in the 10 to 15 year timeline. And I'd actually welcome Kevin's thoughts on that as well, because he would likely spend quite a bit of time in that marketing space too.
I absolutely agree with all of that, Carla. You really hit the nail on the head. Right, maybe I'll just look at the natural gas or the delivery side. You know, we're off takers for hydrogen. But as we build out and we get towards 20% hydrogen blended across the system, that's a good base load, a good baseline of hydrogen being brought off the system. So, Brent, maybe you'll talk a little bit about hubs, but how that works. But that's an important piece of the cog of the wheel of these hubs, where we have that ability year round to take off that base load of hydrogen. So it's building out that economy, and we're getting there. We're certainly moving towards it here in Canada. You mentioned a little bit earlier too, Carla, about innovation, I think, in technologies. And really, I think in Canada, we've been a exporter of hydrogen technologies. And I really think now we're looking at, let's use that here domestically, use those technologies, and it's coming. It's exciting.
Yeah, maybe get to pick up on the Kevin's point about hubs. I think that'll be really interesting to see how things play out. We do think hubs are, and I think other parts of the world see this as well, that hubs play a critical role in getting that initial infrastructure built out. Then the question becomes, do these hubs, how well do they connect with each other? What's the type of infrastructure you need to put in place between the hubs? And we know it's early days still, and we're looking to scale. But again, if we can kind of plan ahead as to what we think this could look like, and maybe in a similar way to what we've seen in parts of Europe or parts of Asia as well, as they start to build out their own hydrogen use ecosystems. And I think there's fair questions around in some jurisdictions, the production may become in very different ways, as we've heard from electrolysis-based solutions. We've got a scalability opportunity here in Alberta from natural gas and carbon capture and storage, but that same opportunity doesn't exist in other parts. So, how do we kind of look at these different types of systems? One may be a little more distributed, smaller scale, others at the large scale. And, start to think about that vision for connectivity over the longer term, because, I think just building something that's going to be, for the next 10 years isn't really going to do it. It's got to really, be purpose built for the future.
I do see we have our first hand up, so I will jump to the live question option. Opie, if you'd like to go ahead, and then there's a few more in the chat we'll move to afterwards. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Mark, and thank you, our presenters, for the very insightful section. I mean, I know that my question is about, hydrogen transportation and storage. And currently, I know there's a lot of technology advancement studies that has been advanced on the production of hydrogen. Well, I would just like to know your take on where we are as a country in terms of transporting this hydrogen to the end users. I know Brent talked about, in the aviation industry, we talked about fuel cells, and we talked about, even industrial applications like the use of forklifts. But transportation of hydrogen has actually been one of the key challenges whenever we talk about the role of hydrogen. So I would just like to know what your perception is about the development of this particular supply chain, and are we there yet? Is there need for more study, and what's your own perception is the question?
You want me to take that one? I think right now the production solutions are being tied as close to the customer demand as possible, because we don't have a large scale built out transportation network for the molecule as of yet. Once the use cases and the demand goes up, that will build itself out over time naturally, in my opinion, and we'll see the same type of transportation systems that we would, be it maybe that the natural gas blending is going up or there's net new pipes going into the ground. Right now, trucking is the solution, which is where you likely don't want to do long distances just because the costs can be competing to a certain extent. But if we use if you look at the array of production pathways and projects that have been announced across Canada right now, the use cases tend to be tied very closely to the geographic area that the project is located in. And then as the volumes of production go up, I think we'll see larger scale transportation solutions that start to connect all of these hubs across the country. I defer to Kevin on how he sees that playing out from a blending perspective and a transportation perspective, since it's quite interconnected with gas. And I think Brent could probably speak to the use cases around the Edmonton hub and how geographically linked they are to avoid those long transportation challenges.
You're right, Carla, and what we're seeing with our pilot projects and some of the planned projects that we're looking at in the future, the hydrogen injected into the gas system will not go into the transmission system. It would go, what we call inside the city gate, so inside where that transfer from transmission to delivery happens. And even within that, with our pilot projects, we're being very specific in the areas that we're choosing. So they're relatively newly built subdivisions. They're very residential. They don't have industrial within those. But I think slowly, well, I know that slowly as the safety case builds out, as the economy begins to grow, as costs come down, we'll slowly watch those areas move larger and larger and larger. The transmission side, which TC Energy would be looking at, the initial steps are being taken. In looking at what does that mean? What does that mean for the pipelines, the infrastructure itself? What about compression? How do we move hydrogen? Because it moves differently down pipelines. So those initial steps are already being taken now for that future look on how we could possibly use existing pipelines now to move it coast to coast. As well, we need to think about, Brent mentioned earlier, I think 40,000 kilometer hydrogen backbone. What can that look like here in Canada as well? We have 200 plus years worth of natural gas in the ground in Canada, and some of the lowest cost methods to change that into hydrogen. So, it's that next step of looking at how do we move that from province to province and province, and that could be our Canadian backbone that can be built out, and we have the experience and the know-how to do it.
Yeah, I think you've covered things well, and we're probably running out of time. But so our hub is really trying to understand, how do we tie together some of the key nodes or key buildings, companies, types of facilities within the region, again, to keep ultimately costs down. So I think there's kind of the domestic transportation piece, there's the continental transportation piece, and then there's the international export piece, and they all may be a little bit different. I think that's the one thing I'm beginning to understand. I think there's a comment about ammonia. Ammonia seems to be a technology that's maybe winning the day as far as the export side goes to move things and then use the ammonia in the other markets. But things on the continental side may be a little bit different than that. So I don't want to predict the future, but I just think we need to understand there's maybe different types of solutions for different spatial geographies here.
Well, thank you for that. Unfortunately, we are at time here, so thanks for touching on that. I don't want to keep anyone past this time, so thank you. I can't say thank you enough for this discussion, for your time, Brent, Kevin, Carla. It's been fantastic. So we really appreciate it. Again, the interest in this event is very indicative of the space. Much larger turnout than I think we were anticipating, so that's fantastic to see. And apologies, we won't get to the last few questions in the chat, but feel free to connect afterwards with any kind of further questions on our end. Give me a shout, and happy to continue the conversation. But otherwise, thank you very much, and have a good rest of your afternoon. If you did this over your lunch hour, apologies, and hopefully you now have the chance to get some food in yet. But otherwise, there's a lot moving in the space. You mentioned the conferences that are kind of coming up on both fronts, so there's tons of interest there if you haven't been tied in so far. And thank you very much.
And Mark, a big thank you to you for organizing. We really appreciate it, and this has been absolutely wonderful.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks kindly, Mark. Thanks, Brent. Thanks, Carla.
Everyone have a great day.